Different worldviews and different perspectives are what ultimately inform theories of human development. These worldviews, perspectives, and theories take a stand on three basic issues of human development. The first issue we'll discuss is nature versus nurture, or the influence of heredity versus the environment. Each theory of human development takes a stand on the age-old nature versus nurture controversy. Are genetic or environmental factors more important? You'll soon learn that understanding the nature-nurture debate in quantitative terms does not really capture lifespan development. It's not that it's 80% nature and 20% influence of nurture. We'll talk about other theories and perspectives that provide a more complex understanding of this debate. For example, when it comes to understanding nature and nurture from a lifespan developmental perspective, which we'll talk more about in a bit, we tend to think that nature informs nurture, just as nurture can inform nature. It's a complex, mutually reciprocating relationship. For example, let's say that you were born with a dairy allergy, so that would be your nature. If you're in an environment where you're never exposed to dairy, so your nurture, then that dairy allergy, that genetic influence, is not going to influence you at all. So here you can see there really is a reciprocal relationship between the two. The second issue of human development is continuity versus discontinuity. In the continuous view, infants and preschoolers respond to the world in much the same way as adults do. And change is a process of gradually augmenting pre-existing skills. One example of continuity might be emotional relationships. For example, if you have very positive parent-child emotional relationships, it's pretty likely that that child will have good peer emotional relationships. So we see continuity there. In the discontinuous view, development takes place in stages. There are qualitative changes in the ways of responding to the world, and these changes emerge at specific times, and they can occur fairly suddenly. One example of discontinuity might be your focus on life. For example, young children and adolescents tend to have a very inward focus on life. They focus on themselves, and this is developmentally age appropriate. But as people get older and enter middle adulthood and later life, we see that that focus tends to become more outward. It's a shift from inward to outward. People in middle adulthood and in later life are very concerned about giving back to the world. They tend to focus more on generativity. So here you can see that what's coming before that inward focus isn't at all predicting what's coming next, that outward focus. It's qualitatively different. This graph here, these two pictures, also help describe this issue of continuity versus discontinuity. So if we look at the first picture, you can see the development of a pine tree. Early on, the pine tree is not very tall, but as the pine tree ages, you can see that the pine tree gets taller and taller. So essentially, it's continuous because there's a quantitative augmenting of what comes before. What's coming before is predicting what's coming next. We know that this pine tree will just get taller over time. On the other hand, if we look at the butterfly, this is an example of developmental discontinuity. You can see it's more stage-like, more step-like. So here, at one point in the lifespan, the butterfly is a caterpillar, until very abruptly, very suddenly, it shifts into a chrysalis and shifts again into a butterfly. And so what you can see here is that what's coming before is really not predicting what comes next. It's qualitatively different. There are these different stages. So, any theory that we discuss as a stage theory is always going to take a discontinuous stance on development. The final issue in human development is universal versus context-specific development. Children and adults live in distinct contexts that shape development. Do these contexts impact individual development? Do they interact with other contexts to impact development, resulting in a variety of possible developmental pathways? Or is the individual following a set path or a set course towards development? Is there some final cause essentially pulling that individual through development and their context doesn't impact them? In other words, does development follow the same general path in all people, or is it fundamentally different depending on the sociocultural context? So, developmental science, human development, is the multidisciplinary study of how people change and how they remain the same throughout the lifespan. Developmental science is devoted to understanding constancy and change throughout the lifespan. It examines how and why people change and how they remain the same over time. It also examines how and why people are both unique and similar to each other. So it's a multidisciplinary science based on theories and research studies. So there are many different ways to study development, and there are many different orientations to take, just like anything that we study. This class is taught using a lifespan developmental perspective, and this is something we'll discuss more about in a little bit. This perspective comes out of a contextual worldview, meaning we think context absolutely matters when it comes to development. So, using this perspective and this definition of human development, can you think of some questions that you would want to ask regarding development? For example, some questions that I've been interested in are, how does one really great and wonderful night of sleep contribute to the way an individual experiences stress or emotions the next day? So here, I'd be very focused on looking at within-person variability, or how development fluctuates for any one individual within themselves. We also might want to ask, why are some people very resilient in the face of adversity and other people aren't? Here we'd want to compare the development of two individuals, or between-person differences. In sum, the science of human development is going to reflect the complexity and uniqueness of each person and their experiences. It seeks to understand commonalities and patterns across people. It's firmly grounded in theory, and it seeks to understand human behavior.